Hello and welcome to this episode of Hospitality Tech Talk brought to you by Maestro PMS. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. This is the last episode in a special three-part series with Ascent 360 CEO and President Scott Buelter, who brings a vast resume of experience working with data analysis and digital marketing at companies like Nike, Disney, Royal Caribbean, Lowe's Hotels, American Express, and Samsung. Scott, thanks again for being here. I'm looking forward to the final chapter here as we continue our discussion today.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
We talked about a lot in the first and second episodes, and if people did not already see and hear those episodes, we highly encourage you to go back there. But we talked about what Ascent 360 is, what it does, and we talked about some practical examples of use cases and then more importantly results. So we're going to kind of dive into what the future holds and how Ascent 360 and Maestro PMS play into that. So one thing we hear a lot is how marketing teams are overwhelmed with the disconnected systems. How does this integration help simplify their day-to-day?
It's substantive in simplifying the ability to know your guest, because if in fact you've got disparate systems, and almost every one of our clients does, it's not just that, Maestro is a different system than what might run the golf course. It's way more than that. They also have a website, as an example, and that website is has guests coming to it all the time, meaning that we know that guests are on the website. We know that those guests might in fact book um, and end up in Maestro, but it's still a disparate system. So, what our system does is allow you to, as an example, put a pixel on your website, and that data will feed into the CDP. And so some guests, the ones who are sort of self-identified, either signed up for email or got an email, now they're sort of known around where they are on the website. And so the disparate system issue is only growing. Hoteliers are continuing to take on more technologies, right? At the beginning, it's the property management system, but it moves into a booking engine or a central reservation system, which are all pieces of the puzzle that we end up integrating with. Even revenue management systems, as an example. So now you've got all sorts of data in all these various systems. The goal is to say, let's pull that data into the CDP, let's organize it, let's clean it, and then you say, well, in the future, let's push that data back into Maestro so that when someone checks in, the person at the front desk can greet them warmly, knowing things about them, knowing that they have stayed 22 nights, knowing that they do have a golf course booking, or knowing that they are allergic to nuts or something like that.
So with a lot of pieces of data here that we're talking about moving around, how does your platform ensure it is secure and compliant, especially as we're seeing privacy regulations are really tightening?
If you will, one of the things that I think we're most proud of, because what we do is help our clients make those security and privacy considerations sort of go away, because we're managing all of those. And I'll give you some examples. If in fact you've got a Canadian guest that comes to your hotel, you're not allowed to communicate with them in the same way that you are if they're an American guest, or the same is true if that guest is German. If they're a German guest, you're going to have to follow GDPR. If they're a Canadian guest, you're going to have to follow what's called CASL, the Canadian anti-spam law. And in the United States, you've got a spam law that a lot of people sort of call the you can spam law, right? It's the weakest of the bunch. But what you don't want to do is run afoul of either of those two other systems. So because our system knows that they are Canadian, it will, for that individual, follow the Canadian anti-spam law. So as an example, if they've done business with you and have a booking, once they depart, our system will count 24 months, which is exactly how long the Canadian law lets you speak with them. And if they don't do business with you again, we will unsubscribe them from the system. So if you sort of consider how the complexity of what that actually means, what that actually means is that we actually need the data from Maestro to make any of those decisions, and that is that departure date, right? And then we need to count those 24 months. If in fact they're from Germany, that 24 months doesn't even matter. We're going to need a explicit permission. And we can get that explicit permission from our system. We can get that explicit permission from Maestro. But if we don't have that explicit permission, we're not allowed to do it. And the same exists for the California privacy regulations. So as an example, our system supports, what you call right to be forgotten. And that is if a guest emails us and says, hey, under California privacy law, I want to be forgotten, then it's incumbent on us to delete that data. And of course, we do exactly that. So I think those pieces I kind of spoke to, management of privacy regulations. And I think it's really, really important because if you'd say to a hotelier, hey, it's kind of, I need you to go read these privacy regulations, understand how they work, and manage our marketing program to those privacy regulations, they would just throw up their hands and say, like, that isn't, I'm not going to become an expert on that. That's actually why Ascent 360 becomes an expert on it. And it's actually why platforms that don't integrate with Maestro, in some sense, really can't be used too long into the future as these things accelerate. If you're using, one of the just off the shelf email service providers that doesn't integrate with Maestro, you're going to run afoul of the law, and that those laws are really, really expensive if in fact the governing boards, come down on you.
So, zooming out a bit, how do you see the role of CDPs evolving in hospitality over the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
I think the first thing is I think CDPs are relatively new to hospitality. Ascent 360 has been at this for 14 years or so, and we actually started in the ski industry. And why the ski industry? Because the ski industry has had this disparate data problem for the longest, right? Such a complex business that these ski resorts run, right? They run hotels, they run golf courses, they run the mountain. The mountain has subscription products like passes. It has daily tickets. They have rental business. They've got lesson business, and they have food and beverage um, many times over. And so, if you can imagine getting all of that data into the same place is really, really complicated. That's what we mastered, 14 years ago, which has sort of helped us do really well in, if you will, the other side, and what's probably the larger side of hospitality, and that is, hotels, beach resorts, those sort of things. So I think first and foremost, I think CDPs are going to become universal. It's just one of the tools that every hotel needs to have in their tool belt so they can manage the guests and have really good relationships with them. Speaking to like how it's going to evolve from here, I think you sort of expect a couple of things to happen. One is on the data analysis side, and one is on the sort of creative and content side. On the data analysis side, the tools that are available more and more to automatically analyze and understand data are rapidly growing. And these, I wouldn't call them AI. I think it's a mistake to call that side of it AI. What's actually evolving here is more what you might call sort of predictive analytics. And it falls within a bucket of AI. But if you can sort of en masse analyze your guests, really understand who they are, maybe even put them into persona groups, right? Maybe a budget sensitive family is a persona group, or a dual income young professional might be a different persona that you really want to speak to in fundamentally different ways, right? So that's the data side. I think AI on the content and creative side is actually pretty fantastic as well. Right now, it is hard for a hotelier to make the content and creative for building a text message or building an email, that is becoming so much easier. Right? You can have auto-generated offer codes, have AI generate the messaging that you're driving, and frankly, it's getting to the place that you can, the AI can generate the images as well, or build images from images that you already have. Right? Take a hotel scene with the fire we talked about earlier and add some people into it, and it can achieve these sorts of things. So I think the sophistication is only going to go up, and I think that's actually pretty exciting because it makes it easier and easier for any hotelier to compete with the really big brands that have a lot of marketing muscle.
Can you share maybe a favorite customer story or stories where you saw the integration really change the game for a hotel or group?
So there's a resort that we work with in California that before they started using Ascent 360, they were sort of stressed out with this idea of sending their newsletter. And they were trying to send a newsletter, they called it a newsletter every 2 weeks. And that meant that there were these marketers who were trying to come up with content, ideas, make it fresh and interesting, that sort of thing. Once they moved onto our platform, they started building automations that made sense to them intuitively because what they know about the resort. And those automations are things like pre-arrival and post-departure and automations that actually occur while the guest is on property. And I would say it took about 3 years, but they're at a place where they've got about 50 automations running. And those are for all sorts of sections of their business. And what it sort of enables is this amazing guest communication cycle that the guest really does feel as though they are special, they are treated well, that the hotel knows who they are, and the amount of work that it takes them to run the program now is down dramatically, right? There's no concept of a newsletter anymore at all, right? That idea is just totally gone.
So if a hotelier is listening today, they're using Maestro, but they're not yet a client of Ascent 360, what would you want them to know? Give me your best elevator pitch, Scott.
Yeah, I think there's what I would say is if in fact that hotelier wants to do a great job of, treating their guest well, knowing who their guest is, and ensuring that their guest is going to come back, they should use a platform like Ascent 360. The other thing that I would suggest to them is what you really want to do is get started, because I know that some of what I'm talking about, it might seem like sort of a very complicated vision for a hotelier to undertake. It's really just one foot in front of another. Maybe like that example I just talked about, the California resort. They started with a newsletter and then they just started with one automation and then two and then three. And it happens slowly and it happens over time. But if you sort of approach it very methodically, you can get to a place where you have a really good cycle, communication cycle with your guest. The other thing that happens naturally is the database grows and you end up with more and more guests in your database over time. Might start with 10,000 and maybe 3 4 years later you've got 50,000. And if you can imagine a system in which you're talking to 50,000 people, right? That's the size of, a stadium. All of a sudden your direct bookings do go through the roof and you keep the hotel full, because that's effectively the ultimate outcome.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to the Hospitality Tech Talk podcast brought to you, of course, by Maestro PMS. And you can always visit maestropms.com for more information and to check out more podcast episodes. And be sure to check out episodes 1 and 2 if you missed the first portions of this series. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope to connect with you on another podcast soon.